Welcome to the Best Interest Podcast, where we believe Benjamin Franklin's advice that an investment in knowledge pays the best interest, both in finances and in your life. Every episode teaches you personal finance and investing in simple terms. Now, here's your host, Jesse Kramer.
Hello and welcome to episode 89 of the Best Interest Podcast. My name is Jesse Kramer. Later in today's episode, Katie Gatti Tassin from the Money with Katie show will be joining us. We're very excited to have Katie on the show. But first, we're going to do our usual little thing, a quick little monologue from me. And before we get to that, we'll have our customary review of the week. This one comes in from WRB Superman, who wrote, "Excellent, concise, easy to understand, and responsive. My multimillionaire friend recommended the Best Interest Podcast, and it is my go-to on my drive into work." Well, Superman, I'm glad that your friend made the referral, and the fact that they seemingly have found some financial success hopefully means that they have good taste in podcasts. Thank you for the kind words. I'm glad you find it concise and easy to understand. That is the goal here. So WRB Superman, if you're listening to this, shoot me an email, jesse@bestinterest.blog. And we'll get you hooked up with a super soft Best Interest t-shirt. And now, as you'll hear later, Katie from the Money with Katie show does a really cool job of kind of weaving in stories that have to do with the economy writ large, society as a whole, and how these things affect us on a personal finance level. And one topic that I've written about a few times before, and I think I have some nuanced thoughts on, where I kind of see both sides of the argument, is the whole student loan conversation. So I'm going to talk a little bit before we bring Katie on today about some of my thoughts on student loan forgiveness, or the whole student loan and student debt epidemic that we're seeing here in the U.S. Now, this first post is called "Loan Forgiveness Ain't Magic." And I think this is useful and helpful, and it's just factual. It's not too opinionated yet. It's the kind of thing where, share this with anyone in your friend group who believes that Uncle Sam, that the U.S. government can just magically snap his giant fingers to eliminate student loan debt. Because student loan forgiveness is not the same as student loan disappearance. There's nothing magic going on here. And we're going to start with a very simple loan analogy. Imagine that you lend $500 to your brother. And of course, that $500 could be in your pocket, earning 4% in a high yield savings account. So you agree to a 4% interest rate on the loan. And I know, would you charge your own brother interest? Well, first off, relax, it's an analogy. And second off, at least here in the USA, even personal loans like family loans and friend loans, per the IRS, per the law, you need to charge interest on those loans. Of course, you can do something behind the IRS's back if you want to. That is on you. But yeah, technically speaking, you do have to charge interest on loans, even to family. So okay, you lend your brother $500 and you charge him interest, and your brother makes a few payments back to you. But eventually your brother complains to your parents. He says that the loan is just too burdensome and he wants it forgiven. And he must be pretty convincing, because he convinces your parents and your parents agree and they forgive the loan. So poof, presto, magic, the loan is now forgiven. And of course, from that day on, everybody lives happily ever after. Well, except for you, right? Because you're still out the $500. You can't just make a loan disappear, because somebody somewhere is owed that money. Let's repeat that. You can't just make a loan disappear, because somebody somewhere is owed that money. Now, when a loan is forgiven, the forgiving party, such as your parents, they take on responsibility for that loan. They pay the lender, that's you, they pay the lender the balance of the loan, and then they tell the borrower, your brother, that they are now forgiven. But forgiveness is not the same as disappearance, because someone, and in this case it's your parents, someone is now out the $500, right? The original $500 principal is still quote unquote missing. And that debt, or that payment, either ends up on your parents' balance sheet as a debt, or it ends up on essentially their cash flow, or their P&L statement if you were a business. It ends up somewhere as a loss. Someone is losing that money. Now, an alternative forgiveness method, I suppose, something like the government forcing a lender to forgive a loan, is the equivalent of your parents forcing you to just eat the $500 debt that your brother owes you. How, the injustice, right? That's just not fair. Now, in the case of student loans here in the US, about 92% of student loan debt is owned by the U.S. government. The U.S. government is the lender in that case. It's not owned by a person, like the way that you would own your brother's debt. It's not owned by private lenders. Only about 8% of U.S. debt is owned by private lenders. Now, I think that this fact, the fact that an intangible government body owns the debt, combined with some other factors like loan forgiveness programs, political loan forgiveness rhetoric, combined with the fact that we don't always clearly understand or explain how loan forgiveness actually works, it leads people to falsely believe that the government can magically make student loans simply disappear. Well, the debt doesn't disappear, right? It's either paid off and forgiven, where the government takes on responsibility for the loans, just like your parents took on responsibility for the money that your brother owed to you, or the loans could be unjustly and forcibly forgiven, which, as far as I can tell, doesn't happen in equitable society. That's kind of like a law and order type thing. It just, that wouldn't happen. In a fair society, that wouldn't happen. So in other words, it's really just the first option. It's the first option where the government decides to take on the debt themselves onto their balance sheet. And since the federal government obviously owns 92% of the student loan debt, it means that student loan forgiveness equates to the government eating that loss, just as your parents could have eaten the $500 your brother owed you. And what that really means is that taxpayers will eat the loss. Now, is that good? Is that bad? Well, that's not really the point of this article. Personally, I'm a big fan of certain ways in which the government chooses to spend money to benefit society. And I really don't like other ways in which it chooses to spend money. And I bet you have your opinions too. And you probably like some governmental spending and you dislike others. Now, personally, I'm a big fan, as an example, of the PSLF, which is Public Sector Loan Forgiveness Program, and similar programs. Although in practice, the program's administration has been bungled pretty badly. PSLF, if you're not familiar, it's not complete forgiveness. It requires a borrower to make 10 years worth of on-time payments of their student loans. And it also requires that person to work a public service job for 10 years, something like a teacher or a law enforcement officer or a firefighter. In other words, it requires the borrower to make some sacrifices and to give back to society in a very direct way through a public service job. And if they follow those two rules, 10 years worth of payments and then 10 years in a public service job, the remainder of their loan is forgiven. By tax dollars, right? By tax dollars. So it's this middle of the road solution that incentivizes something that our society needs. That's a win-win. So anyway, that's just one of my opinions. Now, I'm not here to pass judgment on the government or taxpayers taking a loss on their balance sheet to forgive student loans. I mean, maybe it's net positive, maybe not. But the point instead is a simple reminder to you listening that loan forgiveness isn't magic. The debt must be paid off somehow. Someone must take responsibility for that debt somehow. And in the case of these student loan forgiveness proposals, the method that's going on behind the scenes, behind the curtain, that no one really wants to explain, is that taxpayers are absorbing the loss. I'll let you be the judge on that, and obviously you can call your elected representatives to make your opinion heard. Now, going backward, I wrote an article in December of 2020, so it's a pretty old article now, and it's called Curses, Miracles, and the Best Interest Student Loan Solution. Because, again, student loans and student loan debt, it comes in and out. It weaves in and out of the public discourse at various different times. And I was thinking to myself, on the one hand, we have people saying, forgive the entire thing. And on the other hand, we have people saying, no, you borrowed the money. It is your responsibility and you got to pay it off. I found that the public discourse was a bit binary, right? It was one or the other. Status quo is this haunting curse that kind of looms over a lot of my peers, young adults, millennials. But then again, the proposed solution was this kind of divine miracle, right? Government coming down and forgiving the entire thing. And I thought, why not try to find something in between? So my idea, whether it's good or bad, I'm sure it has holes in it, but my idea is that I think people should repay the principal that they borrow. But if need be, we could have smart incentivized systems to lend a helping hand with paying back the interest. And I think this proposal, it checks all the good boxes. I think the math works. It tiptoes this tenuous line of personal responsibility and morality that some people would bring up. I think the government would be equipped to enact such a program. So I ask you to consider this proposal. If you feel like biting my head off, again, you can submit those complaints to jesse@bestinterest.blog. So before we talk about the college loan solution, let's go back to one of my favorite places that I've talked about many times here on the podcast, including, I think, last episodes. Let's go back to the Adirondacks. Every year, thousands of people descend upon the beautiful Adirondack Mountains, seeking the silence and solitude and remoteness of the mountains. Unfortunately, many of them come unprepared. Long-distance hiking is not just a walk in the woods. It's not a simple walk in the woods. And despite the efforts of outdoor educators, hikers regularly find themselves in over their heads. Miles out in the woods, not enough food, not enough water, no warm clothes, no survival skills. It happens all the time in the Adirondacks, like a weekly basis. You get articles about search and rescue that happens up there. Now, if these hikers were student debtors, I think some people would say, screw them. You chose that hike. You're out there. It's on you. We all got to die somehow. Deal with it. And I think other people might say, oh my gosh, someone stuck out in the woods. All hands on deck. All points bulletin. Yank out all the stops. We have to save that person by any means necessary. But okay, how does our society actually react in those situations? Well, in reality, a small team of New York Department of Environmental Conservation rangers, they hike out to the people in trouble. They give them aid if needed. And then they tell these troubled hikers, tie up your boots again. We're walking out of here. We're not going to carry you on a gurney unless you're truly injured. And we're going to give you a ticket for being unprepared. It's certainly not full forgiveness for getting yourselves in this trouble, but it's legitimate aid for someone who found themselves in over their heads. I think that's a pretty interesting example, and we'll keep that in mind. Now, there is a bit of a moral hazard of forgiving loans. And I think people, whether it's people on the left, whether it's Democrats, liberals, people who kind of skew that direction, they might fall in line with this kind of sweeping student loan forgiveness. For example, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez supported the Student Debt Cancellation Act of 2019, which would forgive outstanding federal and private student loans of all previous and current students in our education system. We would forgive all, again, we already talked about this, 92% are owned by the government, 8% are private. And this act would have canceled all of them or would have forgiven all of them, essentially meaning, again, that the taxpayer would take on the entire debt. And Bernie Sanders supported a similar program, which would cancel all student loan debt for some 45 million Americans who at that time owed about $1.6 trillion in debt. And then it would place a cap on student loan interest rates going forward at 1.88%. Which at the time was above what typical interest rates were, right? 1.88%. At the time, you could probably only get 0.25, 0.5% in a high yield savings bank. So that interest rate maybe made sense at that time. But many Americans, many people found significant problems with those proposals. And for what it's worth, I don't blame those people at all. I get it. There's a missing sense of, I don't know if justice is the right word, but there's a missing sense of responsibility or justice in the full forgiveness proposal. For example, number one, it would renege on a clear agreement. If I borrow $20 from you, we both expect that I will pay you back. Number two, it would provide more benefits to people who made ostensibly worse choices, right? If you borrow $200,000 to attend Harvard, my first question would be, does it make more sense to just borrow $100,000 and attend a state school instead? If you forgive everybody's student loans, I mean, you are essentially providing more benefits to people who made ostensibly worse choices. Number three, everything about the college attendance process was voluntary, right? We all chose to attend the colleges we went to or not. We chose our majors. We chose our future career prospects in that way. So does it make sense for the taxpayer to bail people out who find themselves in student debt? Number four, if we're going to forgive student loan debt, why not bail out credit card debt? Why not bail out automotive debt? Let's pay everyone's mortgage too. If student debtors are receiving trillions of dollars of debt relief, why aren't other debtors as well? Number five, who exactly becomes responsible for the cost of school itself? If everything's forgiven, will students care? Will colleges care what the cost is, right? It's free. Essentially now college becomes free. Universities won't care for the same reasons why they don't care much right now. That is that their customers, the students, have easy access to free money. So who becomes responsible for the cost of college itself? Well, the taxpayer, the government does in that case. And then number six, which is related to number five about the rising cost of school. Baby boomers don't fully understand the crisis right now because their four-year education cost, well, like less than a six-pack of beer, right? College costs have rocketed through the poorly maintained fraternity roof, and now it's raining on the pong table. And if you go back, and at this time, this is just a chart that I'd found that looked at 1978 through 2015. So what's that? About 37 years. And the cost of college has gone up about 250%. which isn't even close to anything else when it comes to like inflationary costs. In fact, some things like new vehicles, food, apparel have actually decreased in overall inflation-adjusted pricing. So do I believe wholeheartedly in those 6 arguments I just outlined? Not necessarily. I understand all 6 arguments though, right? I can easily see why other people believe in those arguments. There is a moral hazard, which is a good economics term if you're not familiar. There's a moral hazard associated with full forgiveness. In economics, moral hazard specifically refers to the lack of accountability or the lack of balance between risk and consequence. We can also think about moral hazard in terms of traditional morality. Namely, if you borrow money, you should pay it back. Actions have consequences, and circumventing that in some way feels a little bit amoral. But then again, right, and this is where I see both sides, there's a moral hazard of letting people drown. So having described the moral hazard of full forgiveness, let me draw another line in the sand. Allowing the student loan crisis to continue unabated is more hazardous than full forgiveness. And yes, I use the word drowning. I know maybe it's a bit dramatic because previously I mentioned some legitimate gripes about forgiveness, and now I'm using this flowery, emotive language to pander to your emotions. Drowning, well, yeah, debt truly is a life and death issue for some people. It might not be deadly today, and it might not be deadly for every person, but there's clear data measuring the negative effects of debt on psychological and physical health. And when multiplied across millions of people who are struggling with student loan debt, there's no doubt about it that this is an important issue that truly impacts people's lives. We can consult some surveys here. Granted, surveys aren't necessarily the same as peer-reviewed data. According to a survey of readers from Student Loan Planner, mental health issues and student loan debt are clearly linked. For example, the survey concluded that 53% of high-debt student loan borrowers have experienced depression because of their debt, that 9 in 10 borrowers experienced significant anxiety due to their loan burden, and that 1 in 15 student loan borrowers surveyed have considered suicide due to their student loans. Now, that's millions of people, right? Millions of people, millions of lives. These are our fellow citizens, and they could use a little bit of help. And here's an interesting one that many of you might know, right? These people can't utilize bankruptcy. Student loans are one of the very, very few types of debt that are not forgiven by bankruptcy. So we're chaining these people to a cinder block and telling them that they can't cut the chain. It's like, that Phil Collins song, well, if you told me you were drowning, I would not lend a hand.
Well, if you told me you were drowning, I would not lend a hand.
Phil Collins might not lend a hand, but I think Phil's probably wrong. And writing this article, I went back and thought to myself, how do you explain $100,000 of loans to a 17-year-old? So here's one way to do it. You're sitting down with a 17-year-old. They're right in front of you. And you say, hey, dude, think back to the time when you were in kindergarten. Can you picture that? Yep, that's 12 years ago when Timmy spilled milk on your head. Okay, now think about every single month from that time when you were in kindergarten until right now when you're a junior or senior in high school. And imagine for that every month that you've been paying $1,200 to a loan servicer. Okay, got it? Can you imagine that? That's what $100,000 of loans is like. Well, I can answer this hypothetical for the nation's 17-year-olds who would say, no, idiot, Jesse, I can't imagine that. I don't even remember all my teachers' names in school. I can't contemplate, I can't perceive the idea of paying $1,200 a month, which is more money than I've ever earned in any sort of summer job. I can't imagine paying that for the last 12 years. It goes back to the famous Bill Gates saying that's probably been overstated. We always overestimate the change that will occur in the next 2 years and underestimate the change that will occur in the next 10 years. Our brains, when we're that age, when we're thinking about getting student loans, when we're 17 or 18 years old, our brains are excited for what? Well, for freshman year at school, for freedom, for new friends, for interesting classes. Our brains are mildly prepared for the 4 years of ramen dinner that we're about to consume. But our brains are certainly not considering the 10 or 15 or 20 years of student loan-induced ramen dinner that will follow the first 4, right? We're not even thinking about the fact that our 20s or 30s might be defined by student loan repayment. All we're thinking about are the weeks or months or maybe even a couple years ahead of us at that time. Now, quick little side note that I wasn't very familiar with, it's the fact that actually the people who are typically in the worst positions when it comes to student loans are people who never finished college in the first place. Many people feel some sort of pressure to attend college, but then they find the classwork too difficult. They maybe need to drop out due to family issues. They drop out because of financial reasons. And yes, some people just party too much freshman year and they drop out too. And people without college degrees have an average salary that's $32,000 per year lower than those with college degrees. So college dropouts, they still have to repay the loans that they've taken, but they must do so on significantly lower salaries. So do we allow them to drown as well? That's a question we should ask ourselves. And the highest default rates tend to come from student debtors who went to for-profit universities. Think things like the University of Phoenix or DeVry, the kind of universities that are constantly having commercials on TV. So is it a moral system where we encourage young adults to pursue their dreams? Yes, pursue your dreams, but we're going to saddle you with some debt and then we're going to profit off your struggle. Now, surely that is some form of moral hazard as well. So now that I've kind of argued both sides of the argument, it brings me to the best interest student loan solution. I don't want people to drown. I don't want people to die in the woods, but I also want to maintain some semblance of accountability here. So my solution, and I have the power of a calculator so you can see it for yourself, is that we don't forgive student loan principal, but we do help forgive, at least partially, student loan interest. So we don't forgive the principal. If I borrow $20 from you, I'm going to pay it back. However, the principal, the $20, isn't really the problem with student loans. It's the interest, or as I've described it before on the blog, interests and debt. It has this silent assassination technique, right? Interest is really sneaky because many people are paying thousands of dollars per month against their loans, but sometimes, quite often, less than 10% of that payment actually goes toward principal. The rest just pays off monthly accruing interest. A lot of people don't understand that, which is also unfortunate, and maybe this podcast can help educate them on that front. It's a big issue, but the student loan solution that I'm offering here provides them a way out. So we'll look at an example graduate, a person who's earning a $50,000 salary, but they're $100,000 in debt. And we'll say that their debt has a 5% interest rate. So you probably know this kind of person. She might be a teacher or a nurse. He might be the guy in the office, the new guy who's great at spreadsheets. It's a pretty normal person, and it's a pretty normal kind of situation, a $50,000 salary against $100,000 in debt. If this person repays their loans using 10% of their salary, which is $417 per month, they will end up paying a total of $390,000 over 78 years. Okay, that's pretty unrealistic. Okay, so let's apply a bit of my student loan proposal. And part of my idea, again, we want to incentivize people to contribute what they can to paying back their loans. So part of my idea is that the more someone's willing to contribute on a monthly basis, and we can work through the details, of course, maybe it's a percentage of their salary, maybe it's just a flat dollar amount, but the more that someone contributes, the higher a percentage of interest the government will forgive. So in this case, let's say our hypothetical person is paying 10% of their salary, and let's say that they would get 80% of their monthly interest paid by my solutions governmental program. Again, it's only the interest. The principal is still on them, but we're helping them pay off their interest. So via the program's interest assistance, this particular loan would instead be paid off in 22 years using $111,000 of the debtor's money and $45,000 from the government. Now that's a total difference of $233,000, right? It's $390,000 of repayment in the original solution versus $156,000 in my solution. And it saves 56 years worth of debt payments off this person's life. Now, how is this stark difference even possible? Well, it's because interest is the silent killer. And now, even if you disagree with the details of this plan, totally fine. That's totally fine. But I think the truth remains pretty clear. If the government, if the taxpayer helps forgive interest payments in some form, then principal repayment becomes much more attainable. And in my particular student loan proposal, the individual is incentivized to pay more if they're able. So if they contribute, say, 12% of their salary, which would be, in this case, $500 a month, then maybe the government covers all of their interest payments. And that particular loan would be repaid in 17 years using $100,000 from the individual and $41,000 from the government. Now, both the individual saves money compared to the you're out on your own in the wilderness plan that we currently have, the current solution. But the government saves money, especially compared to this whole idea of complete forgiveness. Now, I do think it's worth understanding who wins, who loses. Well, I know, at least I think I know, from the point of view of who loses, it's a zero-sum game. Now, before, Johnny was paying $150,000 to a loan servicer, And now Johnny is paying $100,000 to the loan servicer. The government is paying $20,000 to the loan servicer, the taxpayer. But because the loan has been paid off early, the remaining $30,000 that would have gone to the loan servicer in the future never goes to the loan servicer. So you could say that the loan servicer is out future income, but essentially all we're doing here is just reducing the repayment period of the loan servicer, whoever that is, whether it's the government holding the debt or whether it's a private entity. They're still getting all their principal back, and they're still collecting the correct amount of interest over the period of the loan. If it's a 5% loan, they're still receiving all 5% for the number of years that the loan exists. All we're really doing is just cutting off the term of the loan by increasing the rate at which the loan is repaid. And yes, in that way, I suppose we're messing with free enterprise, and it might affect loan servicers in some way, but that's the nature of government programs, I suppose, right? This isn't truly a laissez-faire economics free enterprise system that we live in anyway. It's also not a socialist system in which we aren't allowed the free movement of capital. It's something in between. And I think this program, this proposal, again, is something in between. So feel free. I know listeners out there are all over the political spectrum. You come here mainly to learn about personal finance and investing, not necessarily to learn about deep socioeconomic issues like student loans. So I'm an open book when it comes to what you guys think of this idea. Here's a quick ad, and then we'll get back to the show. Every week, I send a quick free email to thousands of readers that shares 3 simple things. 1, my new articles and podcasts. 2, the best financial content of the week from all over the internet. And 3, a financial chart that explains some important concept in the news that week. It's a great primer to boost your financial know-how.
But Jesse, I don't want another email.
Well, this might not be for you, but I do hear you, which is why I make it very short, sweet, and full of only the essentials. A whopping 66% of subscribers read my email at least once a month. They're enjoying it, and maybe you will too. You can subscribe for free on the homepage at bestinterest.blog. Again, that's a free, no-strings-attached subscription at bestinterest.blog. But with that, I think it's high time to bring Katie Gatti Tassin onto the podcast. Katie is the founder of Money with Katie, whose mission is to be the intersection where the economic, cultural, and political meet the tactical, practical, personal finance education everyone needs. Money with Katie was founded in 2020 as a space for Katie to document everything she was learning about personal finance on her journey to financial independence. And as she watched her net worth grow in tandem with her financial literacy, she realized just how valuable this information was, and sharing it with others became her obsession. Katie left her full-time job at the end of 2021 to devote all her energy to building Money with Katie, which was acquired by Morning Brew in 2022. And today, Katie runs the Money with Katie brand as part of a team of 3, and they are rapidly growing. So I'm very excited to introduce to you Katie Gatti Tassin. Katie, thank you for joining the Best Interest podcast today. And from my perspective as a reader and at times as a listener, Katie, I think I'd categorize your content as this witty and perceptive takes that go beyond, the nuts and bolts of personal finance and maybe focuses more on these broader socioeconomic topics, but topics that certainly do affect our individual lives. For example, you tend to say things like, well, we live in a society that does things this particular way. And why is that? And is that a good thing for us or not? So I thought we'd start with an interesting topic that we actually covered here on episode 79 with Phil Perlman, and that's the intersection of wealth and health. So, Katie, what is the news that makes money feel worthless?
Yes. Well, Jesse, thanks for having me. I really appreciate that. The news that makes money feel worthless. I wrote a piece about this because I was in an urgent care a couple of weeks ago. I have kind of the chronic millennial woman stomach issues where my stomach always hurts and started to kind of manifest in this new and exciting way. And I was like, I should probably go get this checked out. So I drove down the street to the urgent care. I had selected my New York magazine that had just come in the mail as my reading material to be like, I'll probably be waiting for a little bit, so let me bring something to read. Not realizing that I had actually picked up the health issue of this magazine, and basically all of the stories in the magazine that issue were about people who went to the doctor saying, I'm not feeling well. The doctor was like, it's fine. You need to eat more fiber. It's no problem. It's just your hormones. And then bada bing, bada boom. What do you know? Oh, actually, I have cancer and now it's stage 3 and I'm screwed. And so I'm sitting in this waiting room reading these stories, about to go tell a doctor like, hey, I have this issue. And I started to reflect on how my material and how other personal finance material and all of these little hacks and optimizations and incremental improvements must feel to somebody that has just been told they have a stage 3 diagnosis. I was like, wow, I can't imagine reading my silly little newsletter about capitalism while I am literally fighting for my life. And I was reflecting on that while at the same time answering questions to this billing department about my insurance. And I'm like, but interestingly enough, finding out you're sick is both the news that makes money feel worthless and the news that makes money now basically the most important tool that you have to get healthy again. What do we typically do with that information? If you are a rational actor in a human body, you're going to go, well, I will spend as much money as I need to keep my life. I will blow the life savings if it means I get to keep my life, right? And that was the dichotomy that I was playing with and interested in. And it kind of culminated in the piece. And like, yeah, this is why healthcare doesn't work as a marketplace, because a market only functions if the consumer has a rational alternative, if they can walk away. You can't walk away if your life is on the line. No rational person is going to make that choice. You are going to do whatever you need to do. So the incentives are all screwed up. So it was kind of a little reflection based on an experience that I was having. I have since gotten a $600 bill for a 45-minute office visit. You know how that goes.
Oh, always.
Yeah. And, it was kind of a quintessential to your point about the way that I like to approach these topics. It was also like, yeah, and hey, by the way, the fact that we have a healthcare marketplace and not a system is ridiculous. And like, let's point out all the reasons that this is ridiculous.
Yeah. Healthcare frustrates the you-know-what out of me for no other reason than exactly what you just pointed out. You have a little thing that's nagging you, a little pain. You're a little more sick than's comfortable. You go in, you do what you're quote unquote supposed to do, go see a doctor. And maybe you have platinum insurance where the premium is probably multiple thousands of dollars a month. But if you don't have that platinum insurance, maybe you have a high deductible health plan. Well, that's a multi-$100 office visit out of pocket, which 9 times out of 10, they say, you know what? Yeah, it's just a little bit of the flu. And why don't you drink some more fluids? And here's a script for you. And it just doesn't quite feel, it's just very expensive. And I've certainly had some times where I'll sit there at home and go, well, am I sick enough to pay $500?
Right. Exactly.
And that's not a fun. That's not
the calculus anyone wants to be making.
Yeah, exactly.
I think what I learned this time with that bill, I have a high deductible plan. Mm-hmm. And as I'm sure your listeners know, from a financial perspective, that actually almost always is going to make more sense unless the deductible is like outrageous. But I max out the HSA, right? I'm in a high marginal tax bracket, so I get some good tax savings there. It's invested. All the best practices have been followed. But the issue that I'm running into and that I ran into in this particular instance, because I've now been to 4 appointments for this issue, with one of the appointments that they charged me $646 for, I call them because I see that my insurance only knocked off $81. And I'm like, hey, trying to negotiate, right? I'm like employing all my little tips and tricks for, okay, I know the Medicare reimbursement rate. I looked at the CPT code. I'm going to try to haggle with you to get this down. I go, I'm willing to pay $350 today. They go, well, you have Anthem. And our contract with Anthem says that we are allowed to charge you $564 for this appointment. I said, cool. Then I don't want to use Anthem. Let's do cash pay. What's cash pay? They go, oh, it's 46% off. Okay, quick calculation, that's $350. I'm like, cool. I go, I'll do cash pay. They go, you can't. You have Anthem. So we have to charge you that. And I'm like, the fact that having insurance makes it more expensive to you out of pocket than not having insurance, the price signal is broken. The fact that Anthem can collude with the healthcare provider. And so those are the types of things that, yes, it is helpful to know how the system works. You can navigate it a little more savvily. If you understand those nuances, you can at the outset say, what's your cash pay rate? And they're going to go, do you have insurance? And you say, I asked what the cash pay rate is. I'm not answering that question yet because I need to assess this. But even knowing that information is not the perfect solve. Because if they tell you, oh, it's $350, you're probably going to go, oh, there's no way insurance is going to make it cost more than that. But it can. And it's that lack of transparency. That is the connection between the lack of transparency in a system like that and how it necessarily is going to have downstream impacts on you as the consumer, and it's going to impact your personal finances. Yes, it behooves you to understand it, but it also behooves you to realize that, like, that is absurd, and that is only that way because there are laws that say they can do that. But laws can change. And if enough people know that, oh, my health insurance is the one that's deciding how much this thing can charge me, and I would actually have a cheaper path if I didn't have insurance at all. If enough people can realize that, well, now we actually have a chance at fixing some of that stuff, and people going, you know what, hey, we don't like this. Like, we should be able to choose. Yeah, I can have my private health insurance, but I should be able to choose if I want to pay out of pocket what the sticker price is and what it costs to go through insurance. So now I'm really on a tangent. This was, Jesse, you should have known better than bringing up the healthcare system with me. But I think it's just like, it's the perfect example of individual choices and the systemic reality coming together to create a more complex and more nuanced picture than like, here's how a deductible works.
I totally relate, Katie. You aren't going on tangents at all. We like tangents here, actually. We like a good tangent. I don't know if I've told this story on mic with the podcast audience or not, but so we had our first baby, a baby daughter, back in early June. Now it's August 23rd. Thank you. And as a personal finance nerd, financial planner, I'm like, okay, we're going to get our ducks in a row and figure out what this is going to cost. Childbirth is not cheap. Hospitals charge a pretty high amount for it. And what if it's a C-section? And all these kind of questions are floating around in my mind. And so I say, we're going to figure this out well ahead of time. So I reach out to first the insurance provider because I figure that's the good place to start. And I ask those kind of common sense questions. What is this going to cost me? How much is going to be out of pocket? Are there any monsters lurking behind in the shadows behind the curtain of the hospital room that I need to be aware of? And their answer is pretty simple. They say, you know what? That's a great question. You need to reach out to the hospital. Do you know where you're delivering? So I go, yeah, I do know where I'm delivering. Okay, I'll reach out to the hospital. Well, the hospital says, Jesse, great questions. Make sure you reach out to your insurance provider. I said, I just did that. And literally, it's the Spider-Man meme of they're pointing at each other, and I'm the lone consumer in the middle. And ultimately, what I ended up doing was downloading a spreadsheet of CPT codes, a specific spreadsheet that's put out by the hospital that says, here are the CPT codes, and here's what the payouts, pay ratios, or whatever the terminology is for all the various insurance providers locally. So I find the CPT code for childbirth, I find my insurance provider, and then I start to get a picture of, oh, okay, this is what they would charge me. This is what the insurance provider would cover. And therefore, this is how much is coming out of pocket. It was a few hours of work, right? Some annoying phone calls. And I just sat there and thought to myself, I mean, how many individual consumers are willing to do that, are going to do that? It's just such a frustrating process. And you have these legitimately billion-dollar organizations on either side. And here I am, the lone consumer.
Just one guy with a pregnant wife. It's like, what are you going to do? You're going to be like, oh, well, I'm going to actually not go to the hospital then. It's like, you don't have a choice. You literally don't have a choice. They have you on the ropes. The fact that you were even able to, I've done the same thing with like downloading the CPT code spreadsheet. I know exactly what you're talking about. But the fact that you were able to even associate those CPT codes with prices and rates, I think it's actually a law that they do have to publish the rates, but the fine for not publishing them is like $500 a day. So the vast majority of these hospitals that make billions of dollars a year are just like, all right, we'll just pay the fine. We're not going to publish our rates. That does nothing to help us.
Okay, ready for a tangent? There's a great story in the book Freakonomics, if you've read it or if any listeners have read it. And it has to do with an Israeli daycare center that had a problem of chronic late pickups.
Yes, I remember this. Yes.
And so it's annoying, right? You have workers, you have employees, they want to go home at a reasonable time, but they can't because the kids are still here because the parents are coming in on time. So they said, you know what, we're putting our foot down. Every time you're late to pick up your kids, we're going to fine you, I don't know what the Israeli currency is, shame on me, $10, we'll say. And the delinquency rate went up because parents said, oh, $10 just to come and pick, that's great. That's a luxury. I'll pay that all day. And it just goes, right? When you have perverse incentives, if the fine isn't harsh enough, well, they're just going to say, great, I'll just pay the fine and continue on business as usual. Here's a quick ad, and then we'll get back to the show. One of the more common questions I hear is, Jesse, what do you like and use? Books, blogs, podcasts, even banks and brokerage firms. What are your recommendations? So to answer that question, I've put together a webpage. You can check it out at bestinterest.blog/recommendations. Again, that's bestinterest.blog/recommendations to check out how I'm improving my financial life. All right, let's switch gears a little bit about some other things that we're concerned about. This isn't a specific question at all, Katie. Do you at all worry that your savings and investments, these things that we talk about, and here we are young, we want compound interest to work on our side, are you worried that all this time and effort and saving and sacrifice that you're doing today will simply get passed down to some future nephew or stepson who's just going to spend it all chasing 70-year-old then Taylor Swift touring around the country? Or I guess put another way, how do we balance the constant reminders to save for our future with the current reality that life is passing us by?
Absolutely. I worry about that. The balance and the reason I think this is difficult, particularly when you are an educator, is that you almost always are going to have two very different types of people that are listening to you. Some of those people that are listening to you are savers. They're obsessed with personal finance. They got 60% save rates already. They're trying to eke out a couple more percentage points. They're into the hacks, baby. They want to know how to get as rich as possible. That group does not need to be told to save more money, right? They need to be told, hey, go touch grass, go on a vacation, spend some of your money. The other group that's listening to you are people who cannot hold on to a dollar, who have either a compulsive relationship with spending or just have never been taught how to manage money. And so they are struggling, right? They need to be told, this is how much you can save. This is how you do it. Here's how you can optimize. So the problem that I run into as a publisher of this type of material is I'm trying to balance between how do I talk to both of those groups and deliver the information that they need to hear. Perfect example of this. We just did an episode about money dysmorphia, which is essentially, it borrows from the phrase body dysmorphia, which is where your perception and reality are not matching up. And so typically with finances, this manifests in one of two ways. You're killing it, you're crushing it, but you never feel like you're doing enough. You always feel like you should be doing a little bit more. You always got that kind of chip on your shoulder, that concern, the monkey on your back of like, I don't know, is it going to be enough? And so you're constantly on your back foot operating from this position of scarcity. And to your point, you're forgetting that life is passing you by right now. Or you are avoidant with money and you are not attached in any meaningful sense to your financial reality that you can't afford to go to Yacht Week because you have $500 to your name and the credit card is maxed out, but you're avoidant, right? You've got your head in the sand. You don't want to look at it. You, for whatever reason, believe that everything is going to be okay, even though there is nothing about your reality that would be indicating to you that you should be feeling that way. Well, when I put out a call for questions, I said, hey, tell me if you feel like you have money dysmorphia. Here's what it is. Here are some different ways it can manifest. Email me and let me know. 137 people emailed me. And about 125 of them, it was the former. It was, I never feel like I'm doing enough. Hey, I'm 28 and I have a paid off house and $500,000 in investments. Am I going to be okay? I still feel like I should be saving. It was that type of person, right? Only like 10 people of this 100 and something submission were like, yeah, I don't know. I just can't stop spending. And like, for whatever reason, I'm just not worried about it. But someone after the fact, so we do the episode with that larger audience in mind. Hey guys, chances are you're actually doing quite a bit. You're listening to this show, which tells me you're probably thinking about this a lot. Mm-hmm. But someone reached out and was like, that episode really missed the mark for me. It made me feel really, really insufficient because like I'm living paycheck to paycheck on $160,000 a year. I can't figure it out. Like, I love your show, but sometimes I feel like I just need the basics. I need you to give me the tough love and tell me that I need to save money. It's just the nature of the game, right?
Totally.
And I think for me personally, I definitely skew more the former camp. And that's why thinkers like Ramit Sethi have been so impactful. Thinkers like Bill Perkins, people who remind you that your life has to be lived now. And there are experiences that you can have now that you cannot have when you're 60 years old. So if you are thinking that you are going to defer all of your enjoyment of life into the future, you need to think really hard about the bet that you're making and what you are giving up in the present moment to do that. You mentioned Taylor Swift. One of the things that I did this past summer was I spent $10,000 taking myself and 3 of my friends to Paris to the Eras Tour, and I paid for all of it. It was the best money that I have ever spent, and it was such an incredible experience. I am so happy that I am in a position to be able to do that, and I want to hold myself to doing things like that every single year. 10 grand, I mean, in some ways that's a lot of money. In other ways, for like a once in a lifetime experience, that is a decision I would make 8 days a week. That is a thing that I'm going to remember for the rest of my life. And I think that Perkins's concept of memory dividends is so valuable in that way because it puts it in terms that finance people can understand. It's like, oh yeah, the earlier I do this, the more of my life I'm going to be able to spend looking back on that and being like, wow, what an incredible experience. Trying to unpack and understand what things you can spend money on that are going to really give you that high ROI emotionally is an introspective journey. But that's something that 3 years ago, when I was so deep in the FIRE mentality, I never in a million years would have taken other people on a trip. I feel so lucky that I've been able to go on this journey now, not just financially, but psychologically, to be able to do that and feel incredible about it. And I'm like, I would have spent 10 times that to have that experience. It was that good. I think that that's really important, that reminder.
The whole idea of almost, I'm thinking of this image in my head of literally like a fire walker walking through fire. I went through the same thing, Katie. And just when I read, whether it's Reddit, when I hear from my readers or listeners, it seems like a kind of common theme where you discover financial independence, you discover this idea of a savings rate and keeping costs low, and I can retire by what an early age. And you start down this very good path in terms of improving your personal finance habits. But at some time you kind of realize like, wait, so I'm going to retire early. I'm going to have this big pot of money that I'm going to sit on, but I'm kind of always going to be a little bit chronically concerned that it's going to run out. So I'm going to live a relatively meager, frugal lifestyle.
Yeah.
And at some point you realize, like, is that really what I want? And you have to kind of find some balance, right? The pendulum swings back and forth. As you were describing your audience and that ratio of whatever it was, 125 out of 137 emails were all on the one side where people are saying, I'm constantly worried about money, even though objectively I'm probably doing all right. I wonder about that too. And I have a feeling that my audience would probably skew somewhat similarly. And I just wonder if that's like a selection survivorship bias where you say, right, what kind of people are going to be out here listening to our conversation right now? It's people who care about their own personal finances enough that they're probably doing all right. And that's why they're probably here to learn more because maybe they're worried if they're not doing enough. But it is interesting. I thought too, as you were giving your answer about the Dave Ramseys or like the Caleb Hammers of the world, who very much I feel like serve the other end of the spectrum, where they're quite deliberately seeking out conversations with people who can't keep a dollar in their pocket. Yeah. And whether you approve of their tough love approach or not, at least there is someone out there who's directly talking about people who really do need those kind of square one basics, nuts and bolts. How do I keep more money in my pocket and what do I do with it? So, it's all shapes and sizes.
Well, the Caleb Hammer example is a good one because I went into his subreddit once, the subreddit about his show. Because I was like, I want to get a vibe for like, who are the people that are watching this? Because it is so aggressive, that style. Yeah. It's like a very particular style. I wouldn't go there. I think he's playing a character. And there were some posts in here that are like, Caleb saved my life. I was $30,000 in credit card debt and still taking my family on these luxury vacations we couldn't afford. That tough love style, there is a market for it. There is a place for it. It is necessary. There are areas of my life where I need someone to have tough love with me. I will sit there and eat a bag of Twizzlers if no one stops me. But I needed a nutritionist to be like, stop doing that. You need fiber, idiot. You need protein. I'm going to teach you how to eat, and then you're going to track it in this app, and I'm going to watch what you're eating, and we are going to work on this together. I needed someone to hold my hand and kind of force the issue so that I could see how much better it feels to have enough protein and water and fiber intake to go, oh yeah, wait, this rocks. Like, I'm going to eat like this all the time. I'm going to put down the bag of Twizzlers. But for some people, spending is the bag of Twizzlers. And until someone kind of forces them into seeing it differently and how good it feels to be financially secure. It's just people are wired differently. So I completely agree. Like, I don't love the Dave Ramsey like methodology around how he runs his business. But from a messaging standpoint for him, Caleb, the more tough love types, like we need that too. Because for every person that's listening to this who has their you know what together, there's someone else that needs someone to kind of step on them a little bit and help them get it together. And like that's what they're seeking. They want someone to step on them a little bit because they feel like they need that push.
For you, it was Twizzlers. For me, it's Wheat Thins and Tostitos. Whole bag. Whole bag. It's probably Twizzlers are probably better. I don't know. Neither one's great. But you reminded me there of a couple of my high school classmates, teammates. We had this one basketball coach, thankfully only for a year, who was such a dick. I know you just prevented yourself from swearing, which I appreciate. I don't mind saying dick. This guy was such a dick and borderline like physically abusive. And midway through the season, all of us on the basketball team, we all look at each other and we're like, we hate this guy, right? Yeah, we hate. But then after the season, a few of the players were like, you know what? I actually liked him. I liked him because he pushed me in a way that I didn't push myself before. Maybe they just didn't have a disciplinarian in their life and they actually liked a little bit of discipline and structure. And it made me realize, and especially now maybe with the benefit of hindsight and a little more maturity, that yeah, I mean, some people out there, they don't want to be yelled at or screamed at. But some people, they say, you know what? If in the end, I'm actually a better person for being yelled at, maybe yell at me. It's not me personally, and it's probably not your style either, it sounds like. But yeah, for some people out there, it obviously hits home. Those two individuals we mentioned specifically, I mean, they've done pretty interesting things in this whole personal finance space. Thinking of looking backward at life, I look at the way that my parents and grandparents lived, and I feel like I'm not participating enough. Maybe not volunteering enough, not running for the school board, not coaching Little League, Boy Scouts, whatever. Instead, I feel like I'm this atomized individual, and that is stealing some verbiage from one of your articles, Katie, because as you pointed out, it can even extend to a fear that you're somehow even a burden in people's lives. Like you choose to kind of pull yourself out of society or out of communities. You're hesitant to ask your friends or neighbors for a favor. Yeah. I have a lot of different thoughts when it comes to this, but what exactly is going on here from your point of view? And what can we do either individually or societally to start working together more, asking for simple favors, participating? I mean, what's going on?
Well, the way that I thought about it and the reason that I noticed it is because I kept seeing strains of this rhetoric online that were kind of taking the concept of boundaries to a really extreme place. Like, don't ask me to drive you to the airport. Don't inconvenience me in that way. Like, I'll save a friendship, get an Uber to LAX, that type of language. Same thing with like a lot of that therapy speak that got really popular during the pandemic, where it was like, here's a copy paste paragraph that you can send to your friend if they're dumping on you in a time when you don't have the capacity. And it's like, hey, can you maybe schedule a time to have this breakdown with me? I was reflecting on it because we were going to be going out of town. And I was hiring a sitter to come over and feed my cat. And at the same time, my next door neighbor had come over and was like, hey, I'm bringing you, we picked these peaches from our tree in our backyard. Here you go. I was kind of thinking about the fact that like when they had gone out of town, they were like, hey, can you come over and walk Toby? I was like, yeah, I'd be happy to do that for you. So we kind of have this very mutually beneficial relationship where they do things for us, we do things for them. And I was like, oh, there's actually a really interesting financial angle here. And if I'm being a little bit tinfoil hat about it, it would make sense that in a highly individualized capitalist society, it would be beneficial to the people in power if everybody is super atomized from one another, because that means you have to pay for everything you need. You have to pay for all the food you need. You have to pay for every ride you need. You have to pay for someone to come over and help you mount a television. You have to pay for someone to come over and watch your pets. If you're not getting anything that you need from the fabric of your community, the only thing that is left is to shell out money to meet those needs. And I just thought it was really interesting to think about that type of boundary setting and this idea of being a burden and this idea of inconveniencing others. Thought it was interesting to think about it from a financial perspective in that way. And ultimately, what I decided was the relationship that I have with that neighbor, it feels really good. I really like to do things for them. It's not a burden to me. I like to be needed. I like to help them. And I think they like to help us too. And so the fact that it ends up saving both of us money, that we're able to kind of be there for one another, is obviously an added bonus, but it reveals this reality that when we're afraid to burden others, what we're really doing is robbing ourselves and them of building meaningful community. Friendship is not about convenience. Like, friendship is about being there for one another, even when it is not convenient for you. But to willingly atomize yourself, to voluntarily atomize yourself, is to deprive yourself of that chance to build community. And in that way, it's very short-sighted, because you're also not being there for other people when that's kind of your MO and when that's the collective MO. And what was really cool about that piece is I heard from some people that live in neighborhoods where they have a very, very tight-knit community. A lot of these neighborhoods are people who lived somewhere during COVID. So during the lockdown stage of COVID, I should say. And during the lockdown stage, they called them Gatti hours, which were happy hours, but in their front yard, 6 feet apart. So they would be like sitting in these chairs, social distanced. And that through that period, they developed relationships with one another. Now they help out with each other's kids. They make each other food. They lend each other tools. They help with house projects. And it has created these vibrant little communities in these neighborhoods that they never would have gotten had they not been willing to ask and receive. And I think it's just that humanity of asking and receiving that we give up when we financialize every single transaction of everything that we need. So not to, drop the Kamala quote joke, but we really do exist in the context. We live in a society. There is no escaping that. And we shouldn't want to escape it, I think, is the point. And so it's you shouldn't see yourself as a burden for needing help. Needing help is very human. So is helping others.
You remind me of the principle of reciprocity. If someone does something nice for me, I'm kind of hardwired, because we're social animals. That is kind of the fabric of community in society, is this natural reciprocity that we all feel of looking out for one another. And even to harken back to it sounds kind of cliche, but what's it, it takes a village to raise a child, that kind of thing. And it's well, if I don't know anybody in my neighborhood, is it taking a village to raise a child, or is it all up to me? Or, it
just takes a lot of money to raise a kid.
Right, right.
Money has to fill in the gaps.
Or just childcare itself is this thing where daycare is so godforsakenly expensive that I think to myself, okay, you and I both know the stats and we know what the median salary is and what certain people are earning. And it's how do people below a certain income level have children and continue to work? And the answer for some of them is that the family is their community at the very least, where it's oh, well, grandma, she's not doing anything. She's going to watch the kids while I go work. And that, I think, probably used to be a little bit more commonplace, maybe. Or maybe there was just a little bit more trust in society and you had latchkey scenarios or whatever it may be, where it's you know what, the community will take care of the children enough such that they can be trusted on their own. But for whatever reason, I don't know enough about it. I'm not a sociologist or anthropologist or anything like that. But there is this atomization that seems to be going on, or I certainly feel it in my life. And I wonder if I should be participating more. But last one, I want to throw a quote at you, Katie. It's a really cool quote that you wrote, or maybe that one of your friends spoke to you, and then you put it down. And the quote is, "I kept struggling to decide whether to film it or just to be present and enjoy it." And that quote has to do with filming a live show, a music, a concert, something like that, and referring to your friend's desire to film the show and then to share it on social media. And now I more or less abandoned social media. Certainly I cut down my use by 95% or whatever a couple years ago. But I did so, I think, at my own peril, because, selfishly here, any traffic to the best interest from Instagram or Twitter or Facebook probably has gone to zero. And there might be 100+ content creators that I used to network with or be connected with socially on social media. I haven't interacted with them in years. And meanwhile, you've successfully used social media as a part of Money with Katie's amazing growth. And so I suppose maybe this is a personal question. I don't know how many of the listeners are going to be interested, but I suppose they're probably all on social media themselves, most of them. So do you feel like you've struck a good balance between harnessing the good of social media while avoiding the bad?
This is such a funnily timed question, because I was literally just this morning, my friend Caro, She's incredible. She's a novelist. She just sold her film rights to Anne Hathaway's production company. So she's on the come up. She's a stock that's on the rise. And I bought in early, so. But she's like 100,000 followers on TikTok. And she posts these it's like the think boy. She's like a thought daughter.
Okay.
She's the opposite. She's a think girl. So she's always posting this cultural criticism, cultural commentary on TikTok. She's accumulated 100,000 followers doing this. And she recently, like in the last day or two, posted this video being like, hey, I don't think I'm going to post here very much anymore because what I don't like about this platform is that anonymity in the profiles and anonymity in the users is really not conducive to a positive environment for creators. So she kind of sets up this dichotomy. The creators are the people who are creating the product. They are making the thing that everyone else is consuming. And the vast majority of people on TikTok are just consuming content. They are not producing it. But when a platform culturally, however it develops and whatever the incentives are, that like Instagram anonymity is not as common as TikTok anonymity. Most people on Instagram are being themselves.
Right.
It's unusual to have like a troll on Instagram that isn't at least tied to someone's real account. On TikTok, that's very prevalent. And she was like, this platform basically incentivizes and allows anonymity at a level that emboldens people to be really nasty. I think X has this same problem. On Twitter, you also have a lot of trolls that are potentially bots, potentially real people, but they're not people that are putting their name and face behind what they're saying. So yes, on the internet, people are emboldened to be a little bit spicier, but when anonymity is involved, it's much worse. So she said, you know what? I don't need this. I'm not making these. I'm out. At least for a couple months, I need a break because I am exhausted from arguing with people that I'm not even convinced are real. They might be Russian bots, user 7654321. And she was like, it's just not a good use of my time. And I text her about it. I'm like, hey, is everything okay? Like, did something specific happen or what? Because I get it. Like, I've been there. I know that when you put out a video or you put out a post and it strikes the wrong chord, it blows up your entire day, if not your week, because you are fielding responses, you are monitoring comments, you are going back and forth with people. It is a nightmare. And beyond the time that it takes to do that monitoring and responding, it psychologically just railroads you because all you can think about, as humans, we are wired for this, right? We don't want to be ousted. We don't want to be in the out group. That's dangerous. So if you feel like everyone online is pissed at you and taking you the wrong way, you are not going to be able to meaningfully think about anything else until that situation is resolved. And so she tells me like, I'm really tired of the psychological and emotional bandwidth that this takes. And she was like, and honestly, I don't need it. I'm a novelist. I want to spend my time producing long form work, whether that is writing my book, writing the screenplay, or working on, she and I have a podcast together that's like a little Substack project, or doing our podcast. But she was like, I just think my time can be so much better spent. And I sat there and I started to think about it, Jesse. I was like, you know what? A lot of the people whose work that I pay to consume, like If Books Could Kill, one of my favorite podcasts, so funny, so well done. The author Gia Tolentino, who also writes for The New Yorker. Haley Nauman, who writes a Substack called Maybe Baby. Hunter Harris, who writes a Substack called Hung Up. These are all people who I pay at least $5 a month to consume their work. Not a one of them is on social media talking into the void, right? And I still found them and like them enough to pay money for it. So I'm like, I don't think that this is as much a necessity as we have all kind of been told that it is. It does facilitate growth, but I think it's so important to ask, at what cost? What are you giving up for that growth? And are the people that are finding you on social media really going to go be subscribers or listeners or what have you? Some of them will be. That number is a lot lower than I think a lot of us want to believe. And so I am currently in that phase of like, what is social media really giving me? And is there a way that I can relate to it that is just fun and beneficial? How does that look? Because I think right now, if I were honest about the ROI, I think it takes a lot more than it gives.
I feel your pain as far as what it's like when you get dunked on, right? What it's like when you put something out there and people start saying something bad about you. I know Reddit was always the same thing for me. I still spent a tiny bit of time on Reddit. Twitter obviously was the same with the anonymity, but Reddit is just, all just a username. And there were some times when I would share what, in my opinion, was an extremely useful article there.
Yeah.
Oh, but because it's self-promotion, it gets dunked on, and so someone finds a way to make an argument with it. I think you said something about like it railroads your brain, and it totally would. I'd be thinking about it all day. I'd come back to it and see if someone else had dunked on it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so petty.
I remember once, Jesse, I can't remember how I found this, but I saw a post in the personal finance Reddit that was mine. It was like someone shared my Back to a Roth IRA article, and the top comment was like, "This is the most obnoxious thing I have ever read." And I remember just being like, well, then why don't you write something better?
Yes.
Like, good for you. It's like, I think that it's just so easy to critique.
Yeah.
And it's much harder to produce.
Totally.
And so I feel your pain. I know I had to stop myself. I was like, I'm not going to read the rest of this. It's none of my business what these people think about my writing style. All that I care about is that I like what I'm writing and that I'm proud of it. And I'll check the scoreboard, right? Like, I'm the one with the Porsche in the garage, so you can talk your shit on Reddit. And it's just kind of like, at some point you have to kind of like rope the ego back in, but that is the only way that I have found that allows me to live with it, is like, I have to pump myself back up. I have to be like, no, I'm killing it. I'm doing a great job.
Yeah.
And some people are going to hate it, and they're going to take to other platforms. They're going to anonymously troll me. Let them. Who cares?
Yeah.
Talk about me. Go ahead. But I don't like being that person. You know what I mean? Like, I would much rather just not have to think about it at all than to play those psychological games and to be like, yeah, but I'm successful. And who knows what these people are? They're spending their time anonymously trolling me on the internet. Who cares? But like, yeah, it's just sometimes I'm like, it would just be easier and better to not even have to spend any mental bandwidth playing that game or pumping myself back up. What if I wasn't getting torn down in the first place? Wouldn't that be better? Like, I don't know. I'm still negotiating my relationship with social media. I don't really use it in a personal way in any meaningful sense. Like, I post so little on my personal account. And at this point, it is kind of a scarcity mindset thing where I'm like, well, if I'm not there, what's going to happen? But I do think that it is ultimately better to spend the time and energy on the things that move the needle in a real way, putting out amazing podcast episodes that people are going to find value in, putting out really thoughtful essays that are going to make people think differently about things. That is so much more, it's such a more valuable use of our time than putting out a video that people are going to take the wrong way and then sitting there for 8 hours and like stressing out over the comments. It's like, it's just stupid, but it's hard. It's really hard to disengage because these platforms are designed to hook us psychologically and make us feel as though if we're not on them, that like we're missing out on something.
Right.
And two, they've kind of changed the way people consume information. Like distribution has been fundamentally changed by them. So I don't know. Do you read any Cal Newport?
Yeah, I'm familiar with Cal Newport. Yeah.
I don't think he's on social media at all.
He's pretty A-list.
And he's incredibly successful. And I think that that's like, I love looking at anytime I can point to examples like that and be like, it is possible. It is possible to do this without social media. It is.
Totally. And that's, I mean, I'll say I feel FOMO or, scarcity mindset is what you said about essentially the opportunity that I've missed from not being on social media, not sharing my stuff as broadly as I could have been the last 2 years.
Yeah.
But at the same time, right, I see the podcast download stats, I see the newsletter subscriber stats, and I'm saying, okay, things are working in some grassroots fashion, which is great.
Yeah.
And also, as far as communication channels, I mean, email has some unique advantages, in my opinion. And email is this thing where, well, first off, people really have to opt in if they want to be on your email list. They choose to be there. They click to open it every week. But then as far as email communication goes, I can't even think of an example where someone has gone out and dunked on me via email one-on-one in a private conversation, right? It's just a different kind of, it's not a public arena. It's if their name's at all associated with their email address, so maybe the people who would dunk on me, they just choose not to via email because who does that? Yeah. And instead, all I get are positive emails. And it's kind of nice. It's kind of nice when you see someone. So anyway.
I've gotten some email dunks, but what's funny is that when I respond, they take it back immediately. It's like, oh my God, I didn't know I was going to read this. Like, it's a really funny dynamic, but you're right. The environment is different. And I would say you see your stats, right? You see your grassroots growth. But you also, what you're probably not thinking about, think about the sanity points you have gained.
Right.
Think about how much time I have wasted over the last 2 years stressed about this shit that you are not thinking about it. Like, that is really valuable. And at the end of the day, when it comes down to it, like, I think that's kind of to wind it all back to the conversation we were having about saving enough, not saving enough, money, 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 money. We're probably both wired to optimize for money, right? And so we're probably both wired to optimize for growth. But when I think about it, I'm like, I have enough money. I don't need more money. Okay, so I grow a little bit slower. Okay, but am I sane? Perfect. That is an amazing trade-off. Like, I am happy to make that trade-off. And I think that's like, I have been winding back a lot of what I share. Like, I used to post twice a day. I now post twice a week. If I'm sharing something that is spicy, I just won't read the comments. I'll be like, all right, fight amongst yourselves. I'm not going to deal with this. Like, take me the wrong way if you must. But I think that there are ways to change that relationship. And my dream world is one in which there's no Instagram. Meta goes down and never comes back. I'd be like, amazing. I love it. Temptation gone.
Katie, I think after this conversation, some people are going to reach out and leave you some really nice comments, maybe send you some really nice emails, and or leave you a really nice rating on Apple Podcasts, something like that.
Lovely.
No dunking, listeners, not allowed. I won't permit it. By the way, listeners, if you want to laugh, go check out my Apple Podcasts and look at the one review that was a total dunk on me from a couple years ago. It's pretty hilarious. It's still out there. It's the 1-star review that's out there. But the point being, Katie, people want to go listen to more of your cool thoughts. How can they find you?
So if you like podcasts, I would definitely recommend checking out our show, The Money with Katie Show. You probably have a sense for like the vibe of it by now after listening to me blabber and rant at Jesse for an hour. If you like to read, moneywithkatie.com is where I publish my essays. And there's also a newsletter that you can subscribe to there. I send them out on a weekly basis. And if you are an Instagram user, I am Money with Katie on Instagram, not sharing as much there, but that is a place that I share more casual thoughts and more short form stuff. So Jesse, thank you so much for having me on. It was a pleasure. I loved your questions and it was just so fun to get to chat with you.
Oh, Katie, thank you for being here. Thank you for stopping by the Best Interest Podcast.
Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Best Interest Podcast. If you have a question for Jesse to answer on a future episode, send him an email at jesse@bestinterest.blog. Again, that's jesse@bestinterest.blog. Did you enjoy the show? Subscribe, rate, and review the podcast wherever you listen. This helps others find the show and invest in knowledge themselves, and we really appreciate it. We'll catch you on the next episode of the Best Interest Podcast. The Best Interest Podcast is a personal podcast meant for education and entertainment. It should not be taken as financial advice and is not prescriptive of your financial situation.